This is the scariest truth about hell I bet you didn't know. You see, when Jesus returns and sets up the holy city, Jerusalem, and when we get our heavenly bodies, and when we're reunited with our families and loved ones in eternity, did you know that hell would be open for all to see? Don't believe me? Read for yourself. Verse 24, the Lord says, as they go out, they will see the dead bodies of those who have rebelled against me, for the worms that devour them will never die, and the fire that burns them will never go out. All who pass by will view them in utter horror. There's a reason you're watching this video. Hell was not made for you. Jesus is coming back, and he gave his life for you so you don't have to go there. Like and comment below. Wow. Follow and subscribe for more.
Public school system's failing, and this is proof. Why do we forget about Gibbons? Y'all know about gorillas, chimps but a different R rating, and this guy. Gibbons got left behind and left off the Great Apes lunch table. Not this time. I said this for gorillas, but Gibbons are really a whole walking comedy special without even trying. They're famous for the way they get from A to B, and there's actually a term for this. It's called brachiating. He sure does. It also means they have the most out-of-pocket wingspan nature's ever seen. Yo, it's a good thing they're still alive, because finding a fossil that could jump rope its own skeleton, that Jumanji junk would have put us in another pandemic. There's about 20 strains of this arms longer than a Prohibition tree goblin seasoning the earth, including the white-cheeked gibbon, which definitely isn't venom. Apparently, out of all the apes, they're the only ones that mate for life. Including us. That's right, the throat scroll. Well, it's basically a built-in megaphone meant to amplify their calls. Why do they call? Well, some have a door, some have a gate, but gibbons, nah, they mark territory off straight. Basically, they use it to announce the borders of their turf, and you can hear it a mile out. In fact, gibbon couples will sing duets throughout the day, and sometimes they'll even bring the kids to make it a family matter. Also, if you're curious, for these ones, they're all born golden to blend in, but they all turn black when they're 6 months old. The males stay that way, but the females revert back to gold when they're older. So you can go back. They're silly, whimsical, tiger-bullying branch merchants with more reach than Go-Go Gadget that could, let's be real, probably rip your arm off if they really wanted to. They may not be great apes, but they are to me.
The Boulder police now have a complete DNA profile of the killer. It's actually been in the national database since 2008. JonBenet Ramsey's father was just interviewed by Ashley Flowers. The interview was super long, but here's everything you need to know. There's so many updates to this case. The DNA was found in her panties. It contains both her blood and the saliva of an unknown male. This has been used to exclude her father from being a suspect. I'm just here to tell you what happened in the interview. You can still think what you want. This also excludes people who made false confessions, but this shows us that it wasn't just from like random sources like factory workers or innocent people. And even though this DNA has been compared to hundreds and thousands of people in this national database, they have not found a match yet. So whoever did it is still unidentified. The reason why this DNA evidence is so important to the case is because it finally put the rumors to rest that her family was involved in this case, because they tested the family's DNA and it didn't match this unknown man's DNA that was mixed in with her blood that was the unknown man's saliva. There's a lot to cover in this though, so I'm gonna make another part. It's already up. Go check it out and hit the plus for more if you like this stuff.
A teenager who felt like Dexter lured a 13-year-old girl into the woods before essaying her and taking her life, all to fulfill his fantasy. 13-year-old Milana Lee was found dead in a creek in Washington County, Oregon on May 10th of 2022. Lee's mother reported her disappearance the day before, sparking a massive search, and they didn't have to look very far as she was found under a mile from her home and school. Her death was ruled a homicide, and authorities discovered through cell phone data and security footage that she was last seen with Daniel Gore, who was 16 years old at the time. Gore was tracked down the same day and found at a local library and made a run for it, but was caught after a 20-minute chase. They also discovered Gore's tent that he was living in not far from Lee's body, and inside they discovered a journal detailing his love for violence. In it, he said he felt like Dexter, and he also carved symbols on nearby trees. He also tried concocting an alibi by stealing her phone, texting a handful of his friends, and repeatedly claiming that him and Lee parted ways at a bus stop. But surveillance video from the bus stop showed the two walked off together towards Gore's hideout in the woods. They also found photos of violent essay on Gore's phone and realized that he essayed her and then took her life. Gore, who is now 18 years old, was tried as an adult and was convicted in less than 90 minutes on all 4 counts during the 2-week trial. He was emotionless the entire time and didn't testify. He was charged with all of this and will serve a mandatory minimum of life in prison with the possibility of parole in 30 years, and his sentencing will be on December 2nd. Rest in peace to Milana Lee, and as always, I'll keep you guys updated.
Because as an animal nerd, I love this video because it mercs the two birds I've been throwing stones at for a minute. Cows are proof that animals are only as vegetarian as their options. There was one time a cow in Australia was caught slurping a python like it was a crunchy fruit roll-up. Really took a whole sand python to their mouth and sucked the skin off that snake. Calm down. They also chew on kangaroo carcasses, but the point is, a lot of the animals you think are herbivores tend to get all kinds of creative when they're dealing with some kind of deficiency. It's why giraffes eat bones, why deer pack up poultry, and why hippos... Nah, that's just hippos. The other thing is, that's not just a snake, but a cobra, as in a kind that can spit venom, and they're scientifically proven to go for the face. But the thing is, venom's expensive to make, at least physically. Snakes don't want to use it unless you convince them that they have to. I think it's something like half of all the bites from venomous snakes are actually dry, and for some species, that can be up to 80. What's my point? My point is, with a predator, it could be a snake, a shark, or a bear. You gotta convince them you're worth the effort, energy, or poison they take to cancel you. Most of the time, they're not even checking for you. The other point is, just because it runs on grass, don't mean it won't make you part of the past. Fun fact, by the numbers, this is one of the deadliest animals in Australia. And next to it's a snake. The more you know.
A woman allegedly kept her baby hidden from everyone by hiding her under a drawer under her bed from the time she was born till she was 3 years old when someone found her. This is so heartbreaking. This poor child could not even crawl at 3 years old, and she was so severely underdeveloped. This happened in England. The baby was discovered in February of 2023, and this is how the baby was discovered. Apparently, a partner of the mother's who was not allowed upstairs in the house had came back to the house to use the bathroom. I'm assuming no one was in the house at the time, but when he went inside the house, he heard a sound coming from upstairs that sounded like a baby crying. So he followed the noise, and it led him to a bedroom, and the noise was coming from underneath of the bed. He pulled out this drawer, and inside was a 3-year-old child. He runs out of the home and went and told his mother what he had just saw, and immediately the police were called. Social workers and police arrived on the scene, and according to a social worker, she said it was one of the saddest things that she had ever seen. She was in shock. She said that she went up to the bedroom with the mother of the baby. She said, "Is this where you keep the baby?" And the mother replied, "Yes, in that drawer," and she allegedly said that no one else knew about her. The mother, who has not been identified, told authorities that she was in an abusive relationship and she did not want to tell the child's father that she was pregnant. A medical examiner examined the child and found that the child could not crawl, could not walk, could not talk, and was making like soothing sounds, like repetitive and rocking back and forth. Her hair was matted, she was severely malnourished, she was dehydrated, she had a cleft lip that had not been treated, and her mother allegedly was feeding her through a syringe. When the baby was found, she was 35 months old, and her mental capacity and physical capacity and everything that she can do was equivalent to a 10-month-old. Within 2 weeks of the baby girl being in the hospital, she did start to vocalize. She was crying when she needed things. She also did have surgery on her lip, but there are other surgeries required. On November 26th, the mother was sentenced to 7 years and 6 months in prison.
Just a few hours after this video was recorded, the young girl pictured in the video would be dead. So this story is incredibly tragic and happened in March of 2024. This is Manvi, a girl from the Punjab region in India. In March of this year, Manvi was celebrating her 10th birthday, and her family pre-ordered a cake from a local place called Cake Kanha. So as you can see at the beginning of this clip, they ended up eating the cake for Manvi's birthday, and they all seemed to be enjoying it. But shortly after eating the cake, Manvi and her sister started violently throwing up. After they had vomited for a while, Manvi then started to complain of a dry throat. She was very thirsty and tired, and she went to bed. Sadly though, Manvi's condition grew worse and worse throughout the night, and in the morning when her parents decided to rush her to the hospital, it was too late, and she was declared dead shortly after arrival. This is the cake in question. Now, according to reports I found online, sections of this cake were sent in to investigators to be tested. The family believes that this was a food poisoning case and that somehow the bakery had included a toxic or poisonous substance inside of the cake, but I couldn't find any further information about what ended up happening. But it's clear with Manvi and her sister growing violently ill, the entire family got ill after consuming this cake, that it was related to this baked good. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
These inmates used AC vents to conceive a baby without ever meeting in person. 29-year-old Daisy Link and 24-year-old Joanne DeBaz are facing separate murder charges and are staying at the same prison. While they were both awaiting trial, they began communicating with each other through the air conditioning vents in their cells. Despite the unusual circumstances, they formed a close bond. During one of these air vent conversations, Joanne told Daisy that he always had a desire to have a child, but since he was incarcerated, this may never happen. He then told Daisy that if he ever had the choice, he would choose her to be the mother of his child. Before long, the two had developed a plan to conceive. They came up with this plan that they were going to use the same air vent system that they used to communicate. Over the course of a month, Joanne would carefully wrap his in plastic wrap about 5 times a day and roll it just like a cigarette. He would put it through the air vent system, and once it reached Daisy's cell, she would carefully take it out. Once it reached Daisy, she used an applicator to insert the fluid inside of her body. After a few attempts, Daisy found out she was pregnant. In December of 2023, Daisy called her family with the great news that she was pregnant, and she told them that she had originally asked staff for a pregnancy test back in November, but they were ignoring her request until December. On June 19th of this year, Daisy gave birth to a healthy baby girl, and now that baby girl lives with Daisy's mother. Jail officials were initially concerned about how Daisy got pregnant. They thought maybe she got SA'd by one of the inmates or staff members, but once they did a DNA test, it did confirm that Joanne was the father of the baby. Daisy stated that she was surprised that this plan even worked, but felt like everything happens for a reason. After the incident, the two ended up becoming separated, but they do communicate through phone calls and video chats with their daughter.
This teacher, known as the camel toe teacher, was just arrested for having a relationship with a 16-year-old student. The teen's father was also arrested for knowing about the relationship and failing to report it to authorities. This woman's name is Haley Clifton Carmack. They arrested her charged with SA of a student, 4th degree endangerment of a child, and 2nd degree SA. She was arrested in Garden Ridge, so she's about to be extradited back to Missouri. She was listed as a math teacher in Lackey High School in Lackey, Missouri. They also investigated the text messages between her and the student as well. There were a lot of messages. It's more than likely she knew she was in hot water and left the state for Texas. Police got a tip about her leaving to Texas, so that's how they found her. This happened a while ago too, back in January. I'm not sure what kind of sentencing she'll get. My guess, maybe like 5 or 10 years. But a lot of people are questioning why the father was arrested, but he knew what was going on. Many are saying he's probably just proud of the son and brushed it off. And others are questioning how she got the nickname Camel Toe Teacher. Let me know what you guys think about this story.
How many people are needed to execute an inmate on death row? Well, it varies from state to state, but in North Carolina, 12 people, all part of the execution team, are present. The team includes 1 physician, 2 registered nurses, 2 EMTs or paramedics, and 7 correctional officers. The physician's role is to monitor the inmate's breathing and heart function. They must notify the warden immediately if the patient has any undue suffering or pain. The role of the registered nurses is to supervise the administration of the lethal injection drugs and supervise the insertion of the IV. The role of the EMT or paramedic is to insert the IV and place the EKG leads. The roles of the correctional officers differ. One is called the executioner, who actually administers the lethal injection. 1 or 2 of the guards are in charge of transporting the inmate from his cell to the death chamber, and the remaining officers are in charge of security. Little challenge question for you. If there are 5 healthcare professionals, one of whom is a doctor, in the room, why do you think a correctional officer is the person in charge of administering the lethal injection?
She fed her son to a crocodile because of his disability. 6-year-old Vinod lived in India with his parents Ravi and Savitri Kumar. His mother worked as a house helper and his father worked as a construction worker. Vinod's parents would often fight about his disability, and his father would taunt his mother about giving birth to a deaf son. His father would go as far as telling his mother to just get rid of him. One night in May of this year, Savitri was getting tired of her husband's daily taunting and arguing about her son, so she knew she needed to do something. It was around midnight and Vinod was asleep, so she carried her son and threw him into a waste canal, and this was a crocodile-infested river. When Savitri returned home, her mother's senses returned and she realized what she just did. She started screaming that she threw her son into the river. Neighbors heard her scream, so they went over to help her to go look for Vinod, and they alerted the police. Police arrived at the river. It was nighttime, so it was very hard to see if Vinod was somewhere in the water, so they decided they were going to check the next day. The following day, they found the deceased body of Vinod, and it was inside of a crocodile mouth. Nod suffered from serious bite wounds and he was missing one of his arms from the crocodile. Ravi and Savitri were both arrested for murder and are awaiting trial.
William Moult disappeared off the face of the earth for 22 years, and he was only found because of a Google Earth discovery 22 years later. In November of 1997, William Moult was at a Florida nightclub enjoying some drinks. He decided to pack up and go home to his girlfriend. However, that night, William would never make it home, and his girlfriend began to panic because he was not one to have erratic behaviors, and he was also not one to be late to anything. His family and his girlfriend hadn't heard from him for hours, so they called the police and filed a missing persons report. His car, which was a white Saturn, could also be found nowhere. It had no leads or anything like that, and the case went cold for 22 years. There would be no leads until 2019 when a random resident in the area was messing with Google Earth and found the image of a car in a pond. The resident decided to call the police to have them investigate, and when they pulled the body out, it was confirmed to be William Moult in there. They took a look back at the plant in 1997 when he died, and there was no residential homes around this area. However, the irrigation pond had been built and there was no lights. So they suspected he accidentally crashed into this pond because of no lighting. Then he was unable to escape his car. It's crazy how something as simple as Google Earth can crack a 22-year-old cold case. This gave closure for William's family and his girlfriend. Originally, it was thought something really bad happened to him on the way home. Maybe somebody took his life or he took his own life. But Google Earth solved this case. Let me know your thoughts.
What is one true crime case that you just can't stop thinking about? I always wonder what really happened to 6-year-old Catherine Corzilius. On August 7th, 1996, Catherine, along with her mom Nancy and her brother Chris, were out running errands. Catherine's dad was Paul Corzilius, who at the time was the tour manager for John Bon Jovi. That day was Paul's birthday, so they were all out looking for a present for him. They all lived on Elder Circle, which is a small neighborhood near Austin, Texas. When they got back to Elder Circle, Catherine wanted to pick up the mail from the community mailbox and then walk home. The mailboxes were only about 1/8 of a mile from their home, and Catherine had done this a few times before, so her mom let her. Catherine would take the shorter route home, while her mom and brother would take the longer route around Elder Circle. This way, they would be getting home at almost the same time. But once Nancy and Chris got home with still no sign of Catherine, Nancy sent Chris to go and look for her. But when Chris couldn't find her, Nancy started searching for her by car. Within minutes, they found her laying in the middle of the road on Elder Circle. She was unconscious but still breathing. According to Nancy, she didn't want to make her daughter lay on the hot pavement, so she picked her up and took her to the hospital. Little Catherine suffered from a fractured skull and never regained consciousness, and sadly, she died later that day. Authorities initially thought that Catherine was a victim of a hit and run, but certain things didn't add up. Where Catherine's body was found was in an unusual spot. Her mom last saw her walking towards their house, but her body was found a little over a mile away from their home in the opposite direction that she was supposed to have gone. Catherine's body was actually found along the route that her mom and brother took to get home, and the autopsy only deepened the mystery. The autopsy showed that Catherine didn't die from a hit and run. Along with her head injury, she also had abrasions on her left shoulder, lower back, right hip, and her knees. The ME found that Catherine had either jumped, fallen, or was thrown from a moving vehicle. One theory investigators came up with was that Catherine maybe tried to hold on to the back of her mom's car on the drive home, but fell off. This would explain the location of where her body was found. But her family did not believe this, so they hired a PI. The PI noted that it was a really hot summer day, and at the time, Catherine's left thumb was broken and in a splint, so it would have been really difficult for her to hold on to anything. And it's likely her mom would have seen her in the rearview mirror. Catherine's family believes she was abducted and murdered. After her death, investigators brought in a canine unit that tracked her scent to a vacant lot 30 yards from the mailboxes, but it was lost after that. This sparked a theory that Catherine was approached by an attacker at the mailboxes, ran into the lot, was caught and thrown into a car, struck in the head, and then was thrown out of the vehicle where she was found. Nancy also stated that it appeared her daughter's body was laid out for her to find. Her hair was smoothed down, her clothes were straight, and her sandals were still on. Unfortunately, there's never been any answers in this case, and it's still labeled a suspicious death. John Bon Jovi wrote a song dedicated to Catherine called August 7, 415. And sadly, in March of 2020, Catherine's brother Chris, who grew up to be a police officer, was tragically killed in a car accident.
Imagine growing up knowing that you were adopted, and 60 years later, when you take an ancestry DNA test, you find out that your birth mom was the victim of one of the most notorious cold cases in American history. Richard Hanchett was born in 1958 in Michigan, and he was immediately given up for adoption by his birth mother. In 2018, Richard, who still lived in Texas, decided to take an ancestry DNA test, and he was immediately matched with relatives from his birth mother's family. He connected with them and even went down to Tennessee to finally meet them. And that's when Richard learned that his birth mother, Ruth Marie Terry, had been missing since the early 70s. For decades, her family searched for her, but they were unable to find her, until 2022. In October of this year, the FBI and Massachusetts State Police announced that nearly 50 years later, they had finally identified the victim of the oldest unsolved homicide case in Massachusetts, the Lady of the Dunes. And the Lady of the Dunes was identified as Ruth Marie Terry. On July 26, 1974, a little girl was hiking with her family when she came across the body of a mutilated woman. Her hands were missing. Police believe this was an attempt to get rid of her fingerprints so they couldn't identify her, and her head was nearly severed. Detectives searched motels and rooming houses and even reviewed thousands of missing persons cases from Massachusetts. They also used clay models to recreate what the Lady of the Dunes might have looked like. Her case unfortunately went cold, and some even speculated that she was the victim of the South Boston gangster Whitey Bulger. In 2000, authorities had her body exhumed to extract DNA, but it wasn't until recently that they were able to use genealogy testing to identify her. This is the same technique that was used to identify the Golden State Killer. Now flash forward to November of this year, authorities announced that they had a new development in the investigation. They had now identified the Lady of the Dunes, now they had to identify who her killer was. Authorities revealed they were seeking information on a man who was already deceased. This man was known as Guy Rockwell Moldavan. Guy was an antique dealer, and he was actually arrested in 1960 in connection to the disappearance of his former wife and her daughter. Remains believed to be theirs were found in their Seattle home. He only served a suspended sentence, so he actually got released in 1962. Now, court records indicate that Guy and Ruth actually got married in Reno, Nevada in February of 1974, just months before she was killed. Now that they have her identity, this case is being treated as a homicide investigation by the Massachusetts State Police and FBI. The public is actually being asked to review Terry's Seeking Information poster. This includes newly released photos and a little bit more information. This case is still ongoing.
This girl got caught digging a hole in the backyard to bury her newborn in just hours after she gave birth to him. And I'm going to give you a trigger warning because the details of this are pretty messed up. Her name's Leticia Rodriguez. She's 17 years old from Marietta, Georgia, and she was arrested on Sunday after she got caught digging the hole by her uncle. According to the report, she gave birth to the baby without anybody's help in the early hours of Sunday morning at her home. After the baby was born, she allegedly ended his life, and I'll tell you how. And then she wrapped him up in a blanket and put him into a grocery bag. Then about 6 hours later, she decided to go out next to this big tree and start digging a hole. Her uncle came out and caught her doing it and called authorities, and when they arrived, they found the deceased infant at the property. Now, she was originally charged with concealing a death, abusing a dead body, and abandoning or throwing away a dead body, but they announced on Friday that she has more charges. An officer said that the baby was very clearly injured, so when they started questioning her, she actually talked. So look, a previous arrest warrant outlining the earlier charges indicated the mother admitted to police that she had used a sharp knife to remove the umbilical cord from the newborn's neck after birth, causing a large laceration on the infant, but that is not the worst part. The mom also allegedly admitted to using a pocket knife to cut out the deceased infant's heart. I had to read over that part like 5 times because I was like, there's no way in hell I'm reading that right. But yeah, that's what she did. The latest warrant accused the teen of causing the death of the infant, which led to the felony murder charge. She was also charged with felony aggravated assault with a weapon. Now, Leticia and her family were originally from Guatemala, but they had moved into that home about 2 years prior. And when neighbors spoke to the police, they weren't able to give them a lot of answers because apparently they never even noticed a teenage girl was living there. She was sent to the hospital to receive postpartum care, but when she's released from there, she's going straight to jail. Police say the investigation is ongoing and she might receive additional charges after the medical examiner determines the exact cause of the baby's death. And I just want to remind everybody of safe havens. You can take your new baby to a hospital, fire station, police department, and hand your baby over without any questions asked. Or if you want to remain anonymous, several of those types of locations have baby boxes where you can just put your healthy, living baby into the box, walk away, and that's that.